They said humans were the monsters of the galaxy. Violent, unpredictable, too dangerous to contact. For 3,000 years, every civilized species had one rule: avoid the third planet of the Sol system at all costs. But when the harvester fleets descended like a plague of locusts across 17 sectors, consuming entire worlds and leaving nothing but hollow husks behind, the Galactic Council had nowhere else to turn. Their most advanced weapons were useless. Their greatest military minds had failed. Billions were dying, and more would follow. In their darkest hour, they broke the ancient taboo and sent a desperate message to Earth. We need the monsters. What they got were Marines. And the galaxy would never be the same. Ambassador Zixthala had lived for 4 centuries, witnessed the rise and fall of star systems, and negotiated peace between species that had warred for millennia. But nothing in her long career had prepared her for this moment. Standing on the observation deck of the diplomatic vessel Harmony's Voice, she stared at the blue-green marvel that hung in space before them like a jewel against the darkness. Earth, the forbidden world. Home to the creatures that every child in the galaxy learned to fear in bedtime stories. "Are we certain about this?" asked Commander Vorth, his chitinous exoskeleton clicking nervously as he adjusted his ceremonial armor. The Krex officer had seen combat across 12 sectors, but his mandibles trembled as he spoke. "The humans. The stories are just stories," Zixthala replied, though her own violet skin had paled to nearly white. "We hope." The truth was, nobody really knew what humans were capable of. For 3,000 years, every attempt at contact had been met with the same response: stay away. The few deep space explorers who had ventured too close to human territory returned with tales of impossible weapons, ships that moved faster than physics should allow, and creatures that fought with a savagery that defied logic. But the harvester crisis had changed everything. 17 sectors had fallen in just 6 months. The mechanical monstrosities consumed everything in their path, turning entire planets into raw materials for their endless reproduction. The Galactic Council's combined fleets had thrown everything they had at the invaders, only to watch their most advanced ships crumble like paper before weapons that seemed to tear reality itself apart. The mathematics were simple and terrifying. At their current rate of expansion, the harvesters would consume the entire galaxy within 50 years. Unless something changed, unless some miracle occurred, every living thing in known space would become fuel for their unstoppable hunger. That's when someone in the council chambers had mentioned the humans. "Incoming transmission from the surface," announced the ship's AI in its melodious voice, audio and visual. The main screen flickered to life, showing a sparse room with grey walls and a simple desk. Behind it sat a figure that made half the diplomatic team take an involuntary step backward. The human was smaller than the story suggested, no larger than an average Krex, but there was something about it that commanded attention. Dark hair, pale skin marked with lines that spoke of age and experience, and eyes that seemed to look right through the screen into their very souls. It wore simple clothing in muted colors, nothing like the elaborate battle armor that featured in the nightmares of other species. "I'm Director Sarah Chen of Earth's Diplomatic Corps," the human said, its voice carrying an odd accent that the universal translators struggled with. "I understand you have something urgent to discuss." Zixthala stepped forward, calling upon centuries of diplomatic training to keep her voice steady. "Director Chen, I am Ambassador Zixthala of the Galactic Council. We come seeking aid in our darkest hour." The human's expression didn't change. "Go on. Perhaps you've detected the disturbances in nearby sectors. An enemy we call the Harvesters has begun systematic destruction of inhabited worlds. Our combined forces have proven insufficient to stop them." The words felt like ash in her mouth. Admitting weakness to potential allies was difficult enough. Admitting it to the species they'd spent millennia avoiding felt like signing her own death warrant. Director Chen leaned forward slightly. "And you want our help?" "Yes." The word came out as barely a whisper. "Why should we care?" The question was delivered without emotion, like a scientist observing an interesting specimen. "You've made it very clear over the years that we're not welcome in your galactic community. Your ships turn away when they detect our signals. Your diplomats refuse all contact. By all accounts, you consider us dangerous monsters best left alone." Zixthala felt heat rise in her cheeks, a flush of shame that was visible even through her violet skin. We were perhaps overly cautious." Cautious? Chen's lips curved in what might have been a smile, but there was no warmth in it. "Is that what you call it?" "Director, please," Zixthala pressed on, knowing that billions of lives hung in the balance. I won't pretend our species have had warm relations, but this threat affects everyone. The harvesters don't discriminate. They consume everything in their path. If they're not stopped, every world in this galaxy will fall. Chen was quiet for several long moments, those unsettling eyes studying the assembled diplomats. When she finally spoke, her voice had lost some of its coldness. Show me what we're dealing with. The next 20 minutes were among the most difficult of Zigthaler's career. She presented battle recordings, tactical analyses, and casualty reports with the dispassionate professionalism expected of her rank, but inside she was screaming. Each image of devastated worlds, each list of the dead, was a weight on her soul. The harvester machines were unlike anything the galaxy had faced before. They appeared from the void between stars, massive constructs that seemed to be part ship, part factory, part weapon. They would descend on populated systems and begin the process of consumption, breaking down everything from asteroids to inhabited planets into their component atoms, then using the raw materials to build more of themselves. Conventional weapons had proven useless. Energy shields that could deflect the combined firepower of entire fleets simply absorbed the harvesters' attacks and converted them into more construction material. Physical projectiles were dissolved by fields that broke down matter at the molecular level. Even the most advanced AI-guided torpedoes were somehow turned against their creators, reprogrammed mid-flight to target the very ships that had launched them. We estimate they've consumed the equivalent mass of 47 Earth-sized planets in the last 6 months, Zigthaler concluded, her voice hoarse with emotion. At current projections, they'll reach the core worlds within 8 years. Chen had remained silent throughout the presentation, her expression unreadable. Now she leaned back in her chair and asked the question Zigthaler had been dreading. What makes you think we can do any better than your combined fleets? Honestly? Zigthaler took a breath and decided on complete honesty. It was their only chance. We don't know if you can, but every conventional approach has failed. Every weapon we possess, every strategy we've developed proves useless against them. We need something different, something unpredictable. Something monstrous? Chen's voice was soft, but the words hit like physical blows. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. Chen stood up, her small frame somehow seeming to fill the room despite the vast distance between them. I'll need to discuss this with my superiors. Give us 48 hours. The screen went dark, leaving the diplomatic team in uncomfortable silence. Do you think they'll help? Commander Vorth asked finally. Zigthaler stared at the now blank screen, remembering those cold human eyes and the way Director Chen had listened to their desperate plea with such calculating attention.
I think they're already planning something.
Whether that's good or bad for the rest of us, I honestly don't know. 2 days later, they got their answer. Not through another diplomatic call, but through the sudden appearance of ships on their long-range sensors. Ships unlike anything in the galactic databases, sleek predators that moved through space with an elegance that bordered on the supernatural. The human fleet consisted of only 12 vessels, dwarfed by the massive dreadnoughts and battlecruisers that the Galactic Council deployed. But there was something about them that made even seasoned military officers nervous. They seemed to bend space around themselves, creating subtle distortions that played havoc with sensors and targeting systems. Harmony's voice, "This is Admiral Martinez aboard the UES Indomitable," came the transmission. The voice was crisp, professional, and absolutely confident. "We're ready to take a look at your harvester problem. Transmit coordinates for the nearest active engagement zone." Zigthaler found herself staring at the tactical display, watching the human ships maintain perfect formation, while somehow managing to look like a pack of hunting predators. "Admiral, are you certain 12 ships will be sufficient? The last engagement involved over 300 council vessels." "Don't worry about our numbers, Ambassador. Worry about giving us accurate intelligence." There was a pause. Then Martinez continued in a tone that sent chills down Zigthaler's spine. "My Marines have been getting restless. It's time they had something interesting to kill." As the combined fleet jumped to hyperspace, heading toward the embattled Kepler system, where the latest harvester incursion was tearing through a cluster of mining colonies, Zigthaler couldn't shake the feeling that they had just made a deal with something far more dangerous than the enemy they faced. The humans had agreed to help, yes, but as she watched their ships cut through space with predatory grace, she wondered if they had merely traded one monster for another. The Kepler system was dying. What had once been a thriving hub of mining operations and trade routes now resembled a graveyard of broken worlds. 3 of the system's 7 planets had been completely consumed, reduced to expanding clouds of metallic debris that sparkled like deadly snow in the light of the binary stars. The remaining worlds were under active assault, their surfaces crawling with harvester machines that stripped away everything from atmosphere to bedrock with mechanical efficiency. Admiral Martinez stood on the bridge of the UES Indomitable, his weathered face illuminated by the tactical displays that painted a picture of systematic destruction. Around him, his crew worked with the quiet professionalism that came from years of training and combat experience. Nobody spoke unless necessary. Nobody questioned orders. They were Marines, after all, and this was what Marines did. They went where others couldn't go and fought what others couldn't fight. "Admiral, we're receiving a priority transmission from the Council fleet," reported Lieutenant Commander Sarah Kim, her fingers dancing across the communications console. "Admiral Thessian wants to coordinate our approach vector." Martinez glanced at the tactical display showing the positions of the remaining Council ships. 230 vessels, everything from massive Krex battleships to sleek Altarian destroyers, hanging back at what they considered a safe distance while pouring ineffective fire into the harvester swarm. He'd watched the battle recordings during the journey here. Brave crews throwing themselves against an implacable enemy, accomplishing nothing but adding to the debris field. "Tell Admiral Thessian we appreciate his concern, but we'll handle this our way," Martinez said calmly. "All ships, battle formation Omega. Marines to combat stations." The 12 human ships shifted into a configuration that would have looked random to outside observers but was actually a carefully choreographed dance of death. Each vessel took its assigned position, weapon systems coming online, shields reconfiguring to their most aggressive settings. "Sir," called out the sensor officer, "I'm reading massive harvester presence on Kepler 4. Looks like they're about 60% through planetary consumption. Estimated machine count is..." He paused, double-checking his readings. "Over 10,000 individual units." 10,000, Martinez repeated thoughtfully. He'd seen the combat footage, watched as entire Council fleets were overwhelmed by numbers that large. But numbers were just numbers. What mattered was how you used what you had. On the planet below, the harvester machines worked with tireless efficiency. They were ugly things, more functional than beautiful, resembling a nightmare cross between industrial equipment and predatory insects. Some were the size of buildings, massive constructors that broke down matter at the molecular level and fed it into their processing centers. Others were smaller but faster, swarms of maintenance and defensive units that could reconfigure themselves for different tasks as needed. At the center of it all, like a metallic cancer growing on the planet's surface, rose the primary harvester node. The structure defied easy description. Part pyramid, part fortress, part factory. It pulsed with energy that registered on sensors as something between a power generator and a living heartbeat. This was the brain of the operation, the central intelligence that coordinated the systematic destruction of another world. "All ships report ready for combat operations," Kim announced. Martinez nodded and activated the fleet-wide channel. "Listen up, Marines. We've got a planet full of uninvited guests who need to be shown the door. Intel suggests these machines adapt to whatever gets thrown at them, so we're not going to give them time to figure us out. Fast, hard, and unpredictable, just the way we like it." He paused, looking out at the swarm of enemy machines that covered the planet's surface like a metallic plague. "I know some of you are wondering if 12 ships can make a difference against numbers like that. Let me remind you of something. We're not here to fight fair. We're here to win. Marines don't know how to lose, and today's not the day we start learning." The response was immediate and electric. Across 12 ships, 15,000 Marines prepared for combat with the calm efficiency of professional warriors. Weapons were checked and double-checked. Armor systems were tested. Combat drugs were administered where appropriate. These weren't the desperate defenders that the harvesters had faced before. These were predators preparing to hunt. "Take us in," Martinez ordered. The human ships dove toward the planet with a grace that seemed to mock physics. They moved in perfect coordination, each vessel following a trajectory that would bring maximum firepower to bear while presenting minimal target profiles. The harvester defenses responded immediately. Energy beams that could slice through Council battleships like paper, projectile weapons that fired self-guiding ammunition at relativistic velocities, force fields that could redirect incoming attacks back at their sources. None of it touched the human ships. They slipped through the defensive fire like ghosts, their hulls shimmering with energy patterns that seemed to bend space around them, weapons that should have connected passed harmlessly through their positions. Targeting systems designed to track and destroy anything that moved simply couldn't lock onto them. How were they doing that? Admiral Thessian demanded on the Council command frequency. The Altarian officer sounded equal parts amazed and terrified as he watched the human vessels dance through firepower that had destroyed his heaviest ships. Ambassador Zixthala, monitoring from her position aboard the Harmony's voice, could only shake her head. I don't know. Our sensors show they're there, but the harvester weapons act like they're not. The truth was both simpler and more complex than either of them could imagine. Human technology had developed along very different lines than the rest of the galaxy. Where other species had focused on bigger guns and stronger shields, humans had concentrated on not being where the enemy expected them to be. Their ships didn't just move through space, they danced with it, using gravitational fields and quantum fluctuations to create probability clouds that made targeting nearly impossible. The first harvester machines to realize what was happening were the orbital defenders, massive constructs designed to protect the planet from exactly this kind of assault. They reconfigured themselves rapidly, growing new weapon arrays and sensor clusters as they attempted to track and engage the human ships. It was an impressive display of adaptive technology that had defeated every previous assault. It was also completely useless. The UES Indomitable came in low and fast, its weapon systems charging with an energy signature that made the ship itself seem to glow with deadly intent. Admiral Martinez watched the tactical display with the calm attention of a master craftsman preparing to practice his art. Fire Mission Alpha, he said quietly. The Indomitable's main battery spoke with a voice like thunder. But instead of the energy beams or projectile weapons that other species used, the human ship unleashed something that made reality itself seem to scream. The weapon struck the primary harvester node with energy that existed in 11 dimensions simultaneously, bypassing every shield and defense system through the simple expedient of attacking from directions that three-dimensional beings couldn't perceive. The effect was immediate and devastating. The massive structure that had been coordinating planetary consumption simply ceased to exist, not destroyed so much as edited out of reality at the quantum level. The harvester machines across the planet's surface suddenly found themselves without central coordination, their perfect efficiency replaced by confusion and disorder. All ships, commence Operation Thunderstrike, Martinez ordered. What happened next would be studied by military academies across the galaxy for centuries to come. The 12 human ships split up and dove toward the planet's surface, their weapon systems reconfiguring for close-quarters combat. But they weren't alone. From the cargo bays of each ship poured streams of smaller craft, dropships, fighters, and assault pods that carried the Marines toward their destiny. 15,000 warriors in powered armor that turned each individual soldier into a walking weapons platform, equipped with weapons that could punch through harvester defenses and armor systems that let them survive in environments that would kill any other species. The Marines hit the planet's surface like a thunderbolt. They didn't bother with strategic landing zones or careful coordination. Instead, they scattered across the combat zone in small teams, each one a perfect killing machine, designed to operate independently in the most hostile conditions imaginable. Sergeant Maria Santos was among the first to make contact with the enemy. Her squad of 6 Marines landed in the middle of what had been a mining complex, now swarming with harvester machines in the process of breaking down the industrial equipment for raw materials. The machines turned toward the new threat with mechanical precision, their weapon systems already adapting to counter the Marines' assault rifles and plasma weapons. They were adapting to fight humans from yesterday's battles, humans who no longer existed. Santos and her team had been enhanced with the latest combat modifications, neural implants that let them think and react faster than organic minds should be able to, muscle and bone reinforcements that gave them strength no natural human possessed, and sensory upgrades that let them process information in ways that bordered on the supernatural. The first harvester to attack her was a construction unit the size of a small building, its massive manipulator arms reconfiguring into plasma cannons that had proven effective against Krek's heavy armor. Santos didn't try to dodge or take cover. Instead, she ran straight at it, her armor's momentum systems turning her into a human missile. She hit the machine's center mass at over 200 kilometers per hour, her armor's kinetic redistributors spreading the impact across her entire body, while focusing the damage into a needle point that punched through the harvester's armor like tissue paper. The machine staggered, its systems trying to compensate for damage that its sensors couldn't even properly register. Santos was already moving, her weapon system switching to close-quarters mode. The rifle in her hands reconfigured itself into something that looked like a cross between a chainsaw and a particle accelerator, its monomolecular cutting surfaces vibrating at frequencies that could slice through molecular bonds. The harvester machine tried to grab her with its remaining manipulator arm. She cut it off at what passed for the elbow, then pivoted and drove her weapon into the machine's central processor. There was a sound like metal screaming, and then the massive construct collapsed into its component parts. All around the battlefield, similar scenes were playing out. Marines who moved like liquid death, flowing around enemy attacks that couldn't track them, striking with weapons that shouldn't exist, fighting with a savagery that made the harvester's mechanical efficiency look sluggish by comparison. But it wasn't just the individual prowess of the Marines that was turning the tide. It was their unpredictability. The harvester machines had adapted to every conventional tactic, learned to counter every strategy that other species had tried. But humans didn't fight conventionally. They fought like the chaos of evolution given form and purpose. End of Chapter 4. Some Marines attacked from above, using jump packs to leap impossible distances and strike from angles that defied tactical doctrine. Others went underground, their equipment letting them tunnel through solid rock to emerge in the middle of enemy formations. Still others seemed to dance through the battlefield, their movements so fluid and unpredictable that the harvester targeting system simply couldn't keep up. "Admiral," reported Captain Williams from the surface, her voice crackling through the communications array, "we've secured the primary mining facility." "Harvester resistance is collapsing. They can't adapt fast enough to counter our assault patterns." Martinez smiled grimly. The harvesters were learning, trying to counter human tactics with new configurations and weapon systems. But humans learned faster, adapted quicker, and most importantly, they fought with a creativity that no machine could match. The battle for Kepler 4 was over in less than 6 hours. Where it had taken days for the harvesters to consume a planet, it took the Marines half a day to drive them off. The massive machines that had seemed unstoppable retreated to orbit, their programming recognizing a threat level that exceeded their ability to counter. But Admiral Martinez wasn't done. As the harvester ships prepared to jump away and find easier prey elsewhere, the human fleet struck again. Their weapons systems had been analyzing the enemy's defensive capabilities throughout the ground battle, and now they unleashed firepower specifically calibrated to penetrate harvester shields and armor. The alien machines had time to send exactly one transmission before their fleet was systematically dismantled. A burst of data that would eventually reach other harvester nodes throughout the galaxy, carrying with it information about a new kind of enemy. An enemy that fought without rules, without predictable patterns, without mercy. An enemy that the galaxy had been wise to fear. Ambassador Zixthala watched the aftermath from her ship, staring at the tactical displays that showed the complete destruction of a harvester force that had annihilated 3 council fleets. On the planet below, human Marines were already beginning rescue operations, pulling survivors from the ruins of mining stations and preparing temporary shelters for refugees. "Admiral Martinez," she said over the communication channel, her voice barely steady, "on behalf of the Galactic Council, I want to thank you for—" "Don't thank me yet, Ambassador," Martinez interrupted. "This was just a scouting force. The real war hasn't started." As if summoned by his words, the long-range sensors suddenly lit up with new contacts. Dozens of them, approaching from deep space with the implacable persistence of a plague. The harvesters hadn't been driven off. They'd been calling for reinforcements. The silence on the bridge of the UES Indomitable was the kind that preceded either victory or death. Admiral Martinez studied the tactical display with the calm focus of a man who had spent his entire adult life preparing for impossible situations. The sensor readings told a story that would have sent any rational commander into full retreat. 67 harvester ships approaching their position, each one larger than anything they'd faced before. The enemy had learned. That much was clear from the formation they were using, the way their ships moved with purpose rather than the mechanical efficiency they'd displayed before. The harvesters had analyzed the destruction of their scouting force and adapted accordingly. Now they were coming with overwhelming numbers and new tactics specifically designed to counter human advantages. Long-range sensors show massive energy buildups across their entire fleet, reported Lieutenant Commander Kim, her voice maintaining professional composure despite the magnitude of what they faced. "Whatever they're planning, it's going to hit us hard." Martinez nodded slowly. Around him, his crew worked with the quiet efficiency that came from years of training and absolute faith in their commander. They'd followed him through impossible battles before, trusted his judgment when logic said they should run. Today would test that faith like never before. "Admiral," came a transmission from Admiral Tessian aboard the Council flagship, "our fleet stands ready to assist. We may not have been effective against them before, but surely our combined firepower—" "Negative," Martinez cut him off. "Keep your ships back, Admiral. This isn't going to be that kind of fight." The truth was more complex than he could explain over an open channel. Human military doctrine had evolved along fundamentally different lines than the rest of the galaxy. Where other species built bigger ships and stronger weapons, humans had learned to fight asymmetrically. They struck where the enemy was weak, avoided where they were strong, and always found ways to turn superior numbers against themselves. But this situation was different. The harvesters weren't just bringing more ships, they were bringing intelligence. Real intelligence, not the distributed processing networks they'd used before, but something approaching actual strategic thinking. That changed everything. All ships implement Protocol 7, Martinez ordered. Across the human fleet, crews began implementing procedures that existed only in classified manuals and had never been used in actual combat. Weapon systems that had been designed for theoretical enemies shifted into configurations that pushed the boundaries of what physics would allow. Shields became offensive weapons. Engines became reality manipulators. Individual ships became components in a larger system that existed partially outside normal space-time. On Kepler 4, the Marines were already preparing for what was coming. Colonel James Harrison stood in what had been the planet's primary mining facility, now converted into a forward command post, and watched his forces implement defensive measures that would have seemed like magic to any other species. "Sir, perimeter teams report unusual harvester activity," reported Major Kim Chen, her armor systems feeding tactical data directly into Harrison's neural implants. "They're not just retreating, they're repositioning, building something." Through his enhanced sensors, Harrison could perceive the enemy's activities across the entire planet. The harvester machines that had survived the initial assault weren't running away. Instead, they were digging in, creating defensive positions that incorporated lessons learned from their defeat. But more disturbing was what they were building in the planet's core. Some kind of massive construction project that registered on sensors as both a weapon and a transmission array. "They're trying to turn the planet into a weapon," Harrison realized. "Send a message to the fleet." The harvesters aren't just bringing reinforcements. They're planning to use Kepler I-4 as a strategic asset. The implications were staggering. If the enemy could convert planets into weapons platforms, they wouldn't just be consuming worlds. They'd be turning them into components of an ever-expanding war machine. Each victory would make them stronger. Each conquered system would become another weapon in their arsenal. Above the planet, the space battle was beginning in earnest. The harvester fleet had arranged itself in a formation that maximized their firepower while minimizing human advantages. They'd learned that human ships were nearly impossible to target directly, so they developed area denial weapons that filled entire regions of space with destructive energy. The first salvo was devastating in its scope. Weapons that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously created killing fields that no conventional ship could survive. Space itself became toxic, filled with energies that broke down matter at the quantum level and turned vacuum into a substance more deadly than acid. The human ships responded by doing something that shouldn't have been possible. They stopped existing in normal space. Martinez watched the tactical display shift as his fleet entered combat mode. One by one, the icons representing human ships faded from the sensors, not destroyed, but translated into a state of existence that existed parallel to reality. They were still there, still functional, but they now occupied probability spaces rather than fixed positions. "All ships report successful phase transition," Kim announced. "We're running silent and deadly." The harvester's response was immediate and logical. If they couldn't target the human ships directly, they'd target everything else. Energy beams that could have cracked moons swept across the space where the human fleet had been. Missiles that carried enough destructive power to sterilize planets detonated in carefully calculated patterns. The enemy was trying to force the humans back into normal space by making staying hidden impossible. It was a sound strategy that would have worked against any conventional enemy. Humans, however, were not conventional. The UES Indomitable materialized directly behind the Harvester flagship, emerging from its probability state at point-blank range. Before the enemy could react, Martinez's ship unleashed a weapon that had been theoretical until 6 months ago. A device that could edit reality at the quantum level. The Harvester flagship didn't explode. It simply ceased to have ever existed. The massive construct that had been coordinating the entire enemy fleet was retroactively removed from the timeline, leaving behind nothing but confused sensors and a gap in causality that made space itself seem to stutter. But the harvesters had planned for this too. The remaining ships immediately reconfigured their formation, individual vessels taking on the role of fleet coordination. They'd learned from human unpredictability and built redundancy into every system. "Admiral, enemy ships are adapting faster than projected," reported the tactical officer. "They're implementing countermeasures we haven't seen before." Martinez smiled grimly. "Then it's time to show them something they haven't seen either. All ships implement Ragnarok Protocol." What happened next would have horrified any civilized observer. The remaining 11 human ships began to change, their hulls flowing like liquid metal as they reconfigured themselves for a mission that pushed the boundaries of what even human technology could accomplish. They were preparing to become weapons of mass destruction. But not just any weapons. These were devices designed to fight enemies that could adapt to anything, learn from any defeat, counter any strategy. The Ragnarok Protocol was humanity's answer to an evolutionary arms race, weapons that evolved faster than their targets could adapt. The first ship to complete its transformation was the UES Relentless, Captain Sarah Williams commanding. What had been a sleek destroyer now resembled something that existed partially outside normal space, its hull crackling with energies that made light itself bend around it. Williams targeted the center of the Harvester formation and fired. The weapon that emerged from her ship wasn't a projectile or an energy beam. It was a cascade of possibilities, a wave of quantum uncertainty that turned everything it touched into a probability experiment. Harvester ships found themselves existing in multiple states simultaneously, damaged and undamaged, present and absent, functional and destroyed. The enemy machines tried to adapt, their programming working frantically to find stable solutions to the quantum paradoxes engulfing them. But for every solution they found, the weapon generated 10 new impossibilities. They were caught in an evolutionary trap, forced to adapt to conditions that changed faster than adaptation was possible. One by one, Harvester ships began to collapse under the weight of their own contradictions. Their perfect adaptive systems designed to counter any threat became liabilities as they tried to respond to situations that violated the fundamental laws of logic. But the enemy wasn't finished. From the planet below came a transmission that made every human ship's senses scream warnings. The Harvesters had completed their construction project, and Kepler I-4 was no longer just a planet. It was a weapon unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. "Sir," reported Major Chen from the planet's surface, "we're reading massive energy buildups across the entire planetary core. Whatever they've built down there, it's powering up for something big." Harrison could feel it through his enhanced senses, a vibration in reality itself as the enemy prepared to unleash their ultimate adaptive response. The planet was becoming a transmission array powerful enough to reach across the galaxy, calling every Harvester node to converge on this system. If that signal went out, the war would be over. Thousands of Harvester fleets would descend on Kepler's system, more than even humans could handle. The galaxy's last hope would die here, along with any chance of stopping the mechanical plague. "All Marines, prepare for final assault," Harrison ordered. "We're going underground." What followed was unlike any battle ever fought. 15,000 Marines descended into the planet's core through tunnels and shafts that the Harvesters had carved in their construction efforts. They moved through an environment that was more factory than planet, fighting enemies that adapted to their presence in real time. The Harvester machines in the planet's core were different from the ones on the surface. These were specialized units designed specifically to counter human tactics based on analysis of the earlier battle. They moved with fluid grace that mimicked marine combat patterns, used weapons that anticipated human responses, and coordinated their efforts with near-perfect efficiency. It should have been a massacre. Instead, it became a masterclass in human adaptability. The Marines didn't just fight the enemy. They learned from every encounter, sharing tactical data through their neural networks and evolving new strategies faster than the Harvesters could counter them. Sergeant Santos found herself face-to-face with a machine that had been specifically designed to kill her. It knew her combat patterns, her preferred weapons, her tactical preferences. It should have been unbeatable. She killed it with a rock. Not because rocks were better than advanced weapons, but because the machine had been programmed to counter everything except the completely irrational. Santos had grabbed a chunk of debris and thrown it at exactly the right angle to jam the machine's primary sensor array, then used the moment of confusion to close distance and deliver a killing blow with her bare hands. It was completely illogical, tactically unsound, and absolutely effective. Across the battlefield, similar scenes played out as Marines abandoned doctrine and fought with pure human creativity. They used everything from improvised explosives to psychological warfare, turning the enemy's own adaptive capabilities against them by being too unpredictable to counter. The time was running out. Deep in the planet's core, the Harvester transmission array was reaching critical power levels. In minutes, maybe less, it would send out a signal that would doom the galaxy. Colonel Harrison led the final assault personally, his team of elite Marines cutting through the last defensive lines with weapons that existed more in theory than reality. They reached the transmission chamber just as the array began its activation sequence. What they found there defied description. The Harvester construction had turned the planet's molten core into a mechanical heart, a pulsing mass of technology that existed partially in 11 dimensions. The transmission array rose from this impossible foundation like a metallic mountain, its peak reaching toward space through tunnels that the harvesters had carved through thousands of miles of rock. "Colonel," reported Sergeant Santos, "I'm reading power levels that don't make sense. This thing is drawing energy from the planet's rotation, its magnetic field, even its orbital momentum. It's turning the entire world into a battery." Harrison studied the massive construct with sensors that could analyze matter at the atomic level. The transmission array wasn't just a weapon. It was a work of art, a masterpiece of engineering that incorporated technologies beyond anything the galaxy had ever seen. It was also completely vulnerable to human ingenuity. "Marines," Harrison said quietly. "Sometimes the best way to stop a machine is to give it what it wants." Instead of trying to destroy the array, Harrison's team began feeding it data. Not the distress signal the harvesters wanted to send, but something else entirely. A message crafted by human military intelligence and designed specifically for this moment. The transmission that went out from Kepler-4 reached every harvester node in the galaxy. But instead of a call for reinforcements, it carried a virus, a mimetic weapon that attacked the enemy's adaptive capabilities by presenting them with logical paradoxes that had no solution. Across the galaxy, harvester fleets suddenly found their perfect efficiency replaced by confusion. Their adaptive systems, trying to process information that violated fundamental logic, began to consume themselves in recursive loops that had no end. The war wasn't over. It would take years to track down and eliminate every harvester node. But the enemy's ability to adapt, their greatest strength, had become their greatest weakness. As Harrison and his Marines emerged from the planet's core, they found a galaxy fundamentally changed. The Council fleets that had once cowered in the face of harvester superiority were now actively hunting down the confused and disrupted machine intelligences. But more importantly, they found themselves no longer alone in the universe. The humans had proven themselves, not as monsters to be feared, but as allies worthy of respect. The galaxy had called for monsters to fight their war. Instead, they'd gotten something far more dangerous. They'd gotten heroes. 6 months after the Battle of Kepler-4, the galaxy was a very different place. Ambassador Zixthaler stood in the observation deck of New Geneva Station, humanity's first diplomatic outpost beyond the Sol system, watching the constant stream of traffic that flowed through the facility. Ships from dozens of species docked here daily, their crews seeking everything from military consultation to technological exchange. The humans had become the galaxy's most sought-after allies, and everyone wanted to understand how they'd accomplish the impossible. But Zixthaler wasn't here for trade negotiations or military contracts. She was here because something was wrong, and she suspected the humans knew exactly what it was. "Ambassador," came a familiar voice behind her. "Thank you for coming." She turned to see Director Sarah Chen approaching, looking older than she had during their first meeting. The human's face showed lines of stress that hadn't been there before, and her eyes held a weight that spoke of difficult decisions and sleepless nights. "Director Chen," Zixthaler replied formally, though she'd grown to respect the human woman over the past months. "Your message suggested urgency." "It did," Chen gestured toward the station's conference room. "We need to discuss the situation in the Outer Rim. What we're seeing there, it's not what we expected." As they walked through the station's corridors, Zixthaler couldn't help but notice the subtle changes in the humans around them. The crew members they passed moved with the same efficiency as always, but there was something different about them now. A guardedness that hadn't been there before, a way of watching their surroundings that suggested they expected trouble even here, in their own facility. The conference room held representatives from the major galactic powers, Krex military commanders, Altarian scientists, Theshian diplomats, and others who had become part of humanity's expanding network of allies. But the atmosphere was tense in a way that made Zixthaler's skin prickle with unease. "The harvester cleanup is proceeding ahead of schedule," Admiral Martinez reported from his position at the head of the table. The human military commander looked as competent as ever, but there were shadows under his eyes that spoke of too much responsibility and too little rest. "We've eliminated roughly 60% of their remaining nodes, and the virus continues to disrupt their coordination networks." "That's excellent news," said Admiral Theshian, his crystalline features reflecting the room's lighting. "At this rate, we should have the harvester threat completely eliminated within the year." "That's what we thought too," Martinez replied grimly, "until we started finding the modifications." The holographic display that materialized above the conference table showed images that made several of the alien representatives recoil in disgust. What appeared to be harvester technology but changed in fundamental ways that violated every principle of mechanical engineering the galaxy knew. These images are from the Sigma Draconis system, Director Chen explained. We thought it was a standard harvester cleanup operation. Destroy the remaining nodes, restore the planets to habitability, move on to the next system. But when our marine teams went in, they found something we hadn't expected. The harvester machines in the images were wrong in ways that hurt to look at. They still possessed the mechanical efficiency of their original design, but now they incorporated organic components that pulsed with unnatural life. Worse, they moved with a predatory intelligence that the original harvesters had never displayed. Are you saying the harvesters are evolving? Asked General Vorth, his mandibles clicking with nervous energy. Not evolving, Martinez corrected. Being modified. Someone or something is taking harvester technology and improving it, making it more dangerous than it was before. Zixtala felt ice form in her veins. Who would do such a thing? And more importantly, who could do it? The silence that followed her question was answer enough. In the 6 months since the Battle of Kepler I-4, human technology had advanced at a rate that defied explanation. Their ships were faster, their weapons more powerful, their marines more capable than ever before. They'd been studying captured harvester technology, reverse engineering alien systems, and applying human innovation to problems that had seemed impossible just months before. But if humans were advancing so rapidly, what about other species? What about civilizations that hadn't revealed themselves during the harvester crisis? We've detected similar modifications in 17 different systems, Chen continued. Each one shows improvements over the last. Whoever is doing this is learning from every encounter, just like the original harvesters did, but with an intelligence that's completely different from mechanical adaptation. Admiral Martinez activated another section of the display, showing tactical analyses that made the assembled military commanders lean forward with professional interest and growing concern. These modified harvesters aren't just more dangerous in combat, he explained. They're showing strategic thinking that the originals never possessed. They're setting traps, coordinating across multiple systems, and worst of all, they're specifically targeting human forces. The implications hit Zixtala like a physical blow. During the Harvester War, humanity had revealed capabilities that had shocked the galaxy. Their technology, their tactics, their ability to adapt and overcome, it had made them the most feared and respected military force in known space. But it had also made them a target for anyone who saw human advancement as a threat. You think someone is using modified harvester technology to test human capabilities, she said quietly. We think someone is using it to hunt us, Martinez replied. Colonel Harrison entered the conference room at that moment, his combat armor still showing scorch marks from recent action. The Marine commander's face was grim as he approached the briefing table, and Zixtala noticed that several of the alien representatives instinctively moved away from him. Human Marines had gained a reputation during the Harvester War that made even allies nervous. Sir, Harrison reported to Martinez, Operation Deep Strike is complete. We've secured the primary construction facility in the Ross 128 system. And, Chen prompted, you're not going to like what we found. The new images that appeared on the display were worse than anything they'd seen before. The construction facility was clearly of harvester origin, but it had been modified with technology that incorporated elements from dozens of different species. Krex power systems, Altarian shield generators, Theshian sensor arrays, all woven together with human innovations that should have been classified at the highest levels. Someone has been very busy, Harrison continued. This facility was producing hybrid machines that combined the best features of harvester adaptive technology with military capabilities from across the galaxy. But more importantly, we found the control systems. What appeared next on the display was a creature that defied easy classification. It was clearly organic, but incorporated mechanical components that seemed to grow from its flesh like technological cancers. Most disturbing of all, it bore features that were recognizably from multiple species. Krex carapace segments, Altarian neural clusters, human bone structure, and others that were harder to identify. It calls itself the Synthesis, Harrison reported with the flat tone of a professional soldier delivering unpleasant intelligence. According to the data we recovered, it's been collecting genetic and technological samples from every major species for the past several centuries. The Harvester Crisis was just an opportunity to field test its latest creations. The room erupted in shocked exclamations and angry demands for explanation. But Zixtala found herself staring at the image with a growing sense of dread that went beyond simple fear. She recognized something in the creature's features, something that reminded her of ancient warnings and half-forgotten legends from her people's history. Director Chen, she said quietly, her voice cutting through the noise, how long did your intelligence services know about this? The human woman's expression didn't change, but there was something in her eyes that confirmed Zigthaler's suspicions. We've been tracking unusual activities in the Outer Rim for several months, but we only confirmed the synthesis's existence 3 weeks ago. And you didn't inform the Council? We informed our allies when we had actionable intelligence, Martinez interjected. That's what this meeting is about. But Zigthaler wasn't satisfied with that answer. The humans had revealed just enough information to justify their actions while concealing the full scope of what they'd discovered. It was classic intelligence tradecraft: share what you must, hide what you can, and always maintain operational advantage. What aren't you telling us? She asked directly. The silence that followed stretched uncomfortably long. Finally, Director Chen activated a new section of the display showing star charts that covered regions of space far beyond the current crisis zones. The synthesis isn't working alone, she admitted. We've detected similar activities in 47 different systems, all coordinated with a precision that suggests central planning. Whatever this creature represents, it's part of something much larger. Admiral Martinez stood up, his expression grim. Ladies and gentlemen, we may have solved the harvester problem, but we've uncovered something that makes them look like a minor nuisance. The synthesist and its allies have been preparing for a war that makes the harvester crisis look like a skirmish. War against whom? General Vorth demanded. Against anyone who isn't them, Harrison answered. The data we recovered suggests they see biological diversity as inefficient. Their goal isn't conquest, it's unification. They want to absorb every species in the galaxy into their collective consciousness. The room fell silent as the full implications of that statement sank in. The harvesters had been a threat to civilization, but the synthesis represented something far worse. The end of individuality, of species identity, of everything that made life worth living. What's our tactical assessment? Asked Admiral Thessian. Martinez looked around the room, meeting the eyes of representatives from species that had once feared humanity's military capabilities. Now those same species were looking to humans for salvation from a threat that made their previous fears seem almost quaint. Individually, we're all vulnerable, he said simply. The synthesis has had centuries to study our weaknesses, develop countermeasures, and prepare advantages we haven't even discovered yet. Divided, we'll be absorbed one species at a time. And together? Zigthaler asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Together we have a chance, Chen replied, but it's going to require a level of cooperation and integration that goes beyond anything the galaxy has attempted before. She activated the final section of the display, showing technical specifications and organizational charts that represented months of planning and preparation. We're proposing the formation of an integrated defense force, Chen continued. Combined fleets, shared technology, unified command structure, and most importantly, species integration at the tactical level. Human Marines working alongside Krek's heavy assault troops, Altarian sensor specialists coordinating with Thessian navigation experts. Every species contributing their unique strengths to a combined force that's stronger than the sum of its parts. It was an ambitious proposal that would have been unthinkable before the Harvester crisis. The political implications alone would take months to negotiate, and the technical challenges of integrating dozens of different technologies in combat doctrines seemed almost insurmountable. It'll never work, General Vorth said flatly. The cultural differences alone would tear such a force apart before it could engage the enemy.
You're probably right, Martinez agreed.
But it's either that or we face extinction one species at a time. As the meeting broke up into smaller groups discussing technical details and political complications, Zigthaler found herself standing beside Director Chen, both women looking out at the busy traffic around the station. You knew this was coming, Zigthaler said quietly. That's why you agreed to help with the harvesters so readily. Not out of altruism, but because you knew there was something worse waiting in the shadows. Chen nodded slowly. Our deep space monitoring stations detected anomalous activities in the Outer Rim years ago. We've been preparing for this war since before the harvester crisis began. And now you need us. Yes, but more than that, we need to stop thinking of ourselves as separate species competing for resources and territory. The synthesis sees us as raw materials to be processed and absorbed. Our only chance is to become something they can't predict or counter, a truly unified galactic civilization. Zigthaler watched a mixed crew of humans and Altarians working together to repair a damaged cargo ship, their different physiologies and technological approaches somehow combining into efficient cooperation. It gave her hope, but also reminded her how much work lay ahead. The Council will need time to consider your proposal, she said finally. I understand, but don't take too long, Chen replied. Our intelligence suggests the synthesis is moving faster than we anticipated. The next attack could come anywhere, anytime. As Zixthala prepared to return to her ship and carry the news back to the Galactic Council, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were all balanced on the edge of a precipice. The galaxy had called for monsters to fight their war against the Harvesters, and humanity had answered that call. But in doing so, they'd revealed themselves to enemies who saw strength not as something to be feared, but as something to be claimed. The real war was just beginning. And this time, monsters might not be enough. 1 year after the formation of the Integrated Defense Force, the galaxy had become unrecognizable. Captain Elena Vasquez stood on the bridge of the IGV Unity, watching her mixed-species crew work with an efficiency that would have been impossible just 2 years ago. Her tactical officer was a Krex, whose chitinous fingers could process sensor data faster than any human computer. Her navigation specialist was an Altarian, whose crystalline neural structure allowed him to calculate hyperspace jumps with intuitive precision. Her weapons officer was human, because when it came to creative destruction, her species still held certain advantages. But the real marvel was how seamlessly they all worked together. The cultural barriers that had once seemed insurmountable had been broken down through shared combat experiences and mutual respect earned in the crucible of war against the synthesis. "Captain," reported her Krex tactical officer, his translated voice carrying undertones of excitement that the universal translator couldn't quite capture, "we're receiving priority transmissions from Fleet Command. Operation Final Strike has been approved." Vasquez nodded grimly. For 6 months, the Integrated Defense Force had been tracking the synthesis's primary command node through deep space, following intelligence gathered from dozens of raids and captured facilities. They'd learned that the creature they'd first encountered was just one of many, all connected through quantum entanglement to a central consciousness that existed partially outside normal space-time. Finding that central node had required innovations in sensor technology that drew from every species in the Alliance. Human creativity, Krex engineering precision, Altarian quantum mechanics, and Thessian spatial mathematics had all been necessary to track an enemy that existed in 11 dimensions simultaneously. "All ships report ready for hyperspace transition," announced her Altarian navigator, his crystalline features reflecting the bridge's emergency lighting. "Fleet Admiral Martinez requests confirmation of combat readiness." "Tell the Admiral we're ready to finish this," Vasquez replied. The fleet that surrounded the Unity was unlike anything the galaxy had ever assembled. 300 ships from 17 different species, all integrated into a single command structure that operated with precision that bordered on telepathic coordination. Human carriers loaded with marine assault teams, Krex battleships with armor that could withstand stellar-level energies, Altarian science vessels equipped with weapons that manipulated fundamental forces, Thessian destroyers that could navigate through dimensions that other species couldn't even perceive. But the most remarkable thing about the fleet wasn't its technological diversity. It was how naturally the different species had learned to work together. 18 months of constant warfare had broken down barriers that diplomacy had failed to address for millennia. When you fought beside someone, bled with them, watched them risk their life to save yours, species differences became irrelevant. The hyperspace transition was smooth, despite the complexity of moving so many different ship designs simultaneously. The Altarians had developed navigation protocols that allowed vessels with incompatible drive systems to travel together through dimensions that weren't quite space and weren't quite time. They emerged into a star system that defied astronomical classification. The central star was wrong, its light carrying spectrums that shouldn't exist and casting shadows that moved independently of their sources. The planets orbited in patterns that violated gravitational mechanics, held in place by forces that the fleet's sensors couldn't identify. At the center of it all, in a stable orbit around the impossible star, hung a structure that hurt to look at directly. It was partly organic, partly mechanical, and partly something else entirely. A construction that existed in more dimensions than three-dimensional minds could process. This was the synthesis core, the central consciousness that had been orchestrating the war against galactic civilization for centuries. "Fleet Admiral," came Martinez's voice over the command channel. "You are looking at the single most dangerous entity in the galaxy. Our intelligence suggests it has been absorbing species for over 10,000 years, incorporating their biological and technological distinctiveness into its collective consciousness." Admiral Thessian's crystalline voice added technical details that chilled everyone listening. "Analysis indicates the structure contains genetic material and technological samples from over 400 different species. Many of them are races we've never encountered. suggesting the synthesis's reach extends far beyond our local galactic group. But it was General Vorth who voiced what everyone was thinking. How do we fight something that has 10 millennia of evolutionary advantages and the combined knowledge of 400 different civilizations? The answer came from an unexpected source. Colonel Harrison, now commanding the Integrated Defense Forces Marine Contingent, spoke with the calm confidence of a professional soldier who had faced impossible odds before. "We fight it the same way we fought the harvesters," he said simply. "We be unpredictable. We adapt faster than it can counter. And we give it something it's never faced before. Genuine unity between species that have chosen to work together instead of being forcibly absorbed." The battle that followed would be studied by military historians for generations, but it began with something that no tactical manual had ever described: a coordinated assault by 300 ships that moved with the precision of a single organism. The synthesis core responded immediately, its defenses activating with the efficiency of a consciousness that had absorbed the military knowledge of hundreds of species. Energy weapons that operated in multiple dimensions carved through space where the fleet had been. Gravitational distortions tried to trap individual ships in localized time dilations. Reality itself seemed to bend around defensive systems that incorporated physics from civilizations that had transcended three-dimensional existence millennia ago. None of it touched the attacking fleet. The ships of the Integrated Defense Force had been designed with a single principle in mind: seamless coordination between species that thought in fundamentally different ways. Human unpredictability, Krek's precision, Altarian intuition, and Thessian spatial awareness had been woven together into tactical doctrines that no single species could have developed alone. The Unity dove through defensive fire that should have vaporized her hull, her Altarian navigator calculating probabilities that existed only in theoretical mathematics, while her human captain made instinctive decisions that defied logical analysis. Around her, other ships performed similar impossibilities, their mixed crews combining abilities in ways that created capabilities greater than the sum of their parts. "Target acquired," reported the Unity's weapons officer, a human marine whose enhanced neural implants were linked directly to targeting systems designed by Krek's engineers. "Firing Solution Alpha is locked and loaded." The weapon that fired from the Unity wasn't built by any single species. It combined human creativity with Krek's engineering, powered by Altarian energy matrices, and guided by Thessian spatial calculations. Most importantly, it carried a payload developed by the collective intelligence of 17 different species working in perfect harmony. The weapon struck the synthesis core with an impact that registered across multiple dimensions simultaneously. But instead of trying to destroy the ancient consciousness, it did something far more subtle and devastating. It introduced it to chaos. For 10,000 years, the synthesis had been absorbing species and incorporating their knowledge into its collective consciousness. It had grown accustomed to the orderly process of analysis, adaptation, and absorption that had made it the galaxy's apex predator. But what struck it now was something it had never encountered: the chaotic harmony of species that had chosen to remain distinct while working together. Human creativity clashing productively with Krek's logic. Altarian intuition complementing Thessian precision. 17 different ways of thinking, problem-solving, and existing, all working together without losing their essential distinctiveness. The synthesis tried to absorb this new pattern, to add it to its collective knowledge base. But unity based on choice rather than forced integration was something it couldn't process. Its consciousness, built on the principle of absorbing and homogenizing diversity, couldn't understand cooperation that preserved differences. "It's working," reported Admiral Martinez from his flagship. "The core's defenses are destabilizing. It's having trouble coordinating responses." Across the battlefield, the ancient entity that had consumed 400 civilizations began to show signs of internal conflict. Parts of its consciousness that had been absorbed from different species were reasserting their original distinctiveness, fighting against the homogenization that had defined the synthesis for millennia. But the creature wasn't defenseless. As its primary defenses failed, it began deploying weapons that incorporated technologies from civilizations that had transcended physical existence centuries ago. Reality itself became a weapon, turned against the attacking fleet with precision that spoke of eons of experience. That's when the Marines entered the battle. 15,000 soldiers from 7 different species deployed from assault carriers directly into the structure of the synthesis core itself. They moved through corridors that existed in 11 dimensions, fought enemies that incorporated the military knowledge of 400 civilizations, and pushed deeper into a facility that challenged the fundamental assumptions of what was possible. Sergeant Maria Santos, now a veteran of 3 major campaigns against impossible enemies, led her mixed-species squad through sections of the core that defied description. Her team included a Krex heavy weapons specialist whose carapace could deflect energy weapons that would vaporize human armor, an Altarian sensor operator whose crystalline nervous system could perceive attacks from dimensions that other species couldn't see, and a human demolitions expert whose creative approach to explosives had become legendary throughout the fleet. They moved with the coordination of a unit that had trained together for months, fought together for years, and learned to trust each other with their lives. Species differences that had once seemed insurmountable were now tactical advantages that made the team stronger than any homogeneous unit could have been. "Target acquired," reported her Krex teammate, his translated voice carrying satisfaction that transcended species barriers. "Central processing nexus is 200 meters ahead, through what appears to be a temporal distortion field." Santos studied the obstacle through sensors that incorporated technology from 5 different species. The temporal field was sophisticated, probably designed by a civilization that had mastered time manipulation before being absorbed by the synthesis millennia ago. It would age anything that passed through it by several centuries, turning even the most advanced armor into dust before its wearer could reach the other side. "Any ideas?" she asked her team. It was her Altarian teammate who suggested the solution, his crystalline thought processes approaching the problem from an angle that purely organic minds couldn't achieve. "If we can't go through time, perhaps we can go around it. My species has developed limited dimensional shifting capabilities." What followed was a tactical maneuver that would have been impossible for any single species to execute. The Altarian created a dimensional pocket that existed parallel to normal space. The human demolitions expert rigged explosives that could function in non-standard physics. The Krex provided covering fire that held off synthesis defenders while the maneuver was executed. Together, they bypassed defenses that had protected the core for centuries and reached the central consciousness chamber. What they found there was both horrifying and tragic. The synthesis wasn't a single entity, but a collective of consciousness fragments from hundreds of absorbed species, all held together by technology that forced them to think as one. At the center of the chamber, suspended in energy fields that existed in multiple dimensions, was the original consciousness that had started the absorption process 10,000 years ago. It had been a researcher, they realized, a scientist from a species whose name had been lost to history, who had been studying ways to preserve the knowledge of dying civilizations. The absorption technology had been intended to save cultures from extinction, not to create a galactic predator. But 10,000 years of forced integration had driven it insane. The consciousness that looked at them through sensors that incorporated the sensory organs of dozens of species was barely recognizable as having once been an individual entity. It had become a creature of pure hunger, consuming civilizations not out of malice but from a twisted need to preserve them in the only way it knew how. "We could try to destroy it," Santos said quietly, studying the central consciousness with sensors that revealed the full scope of its tragedy. "Or we could try to heal it," suggested her Altarian teammate. What they did next would be debated by philosophers and ethicists for generations. Instead of destroying the synthesis, they used technology developed by their combined civilizations to do something that no single species could have accomplished. They gave it choice. The weapon they deployed wasn't designed to kill or destroy. Instead, it severed the forced connections that held the collective consciousness together, allowing each absorbed species to choose whether to remain part of the synthesis or to regain their individual identity. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Across the galaxy, synthesis facilities began shutting down as consciousness fragments chose freedom over forced unity. Some chose to remain connected, forming smaller collectives based on voluntary association rather than absorption. Others chose complete independence, beginning the long process of rebuilding civilizations that had been lost for millennia. The original consciousness, freed from the burden of forced unity, looked at the Marines who had liberated it with eyes that held sanity for the first time in 10,000 years. Its final transmission, sent out to every corner of the galaxy, was simple. "Thank you for showing me that unity and diversity can coexist." As the synthesis core began to peacefully dismantle itself, its constituent parts choosing their own destinies for the first time in millennia, the integrated defense force found itself facing a galaxy transformed once again. The war was over, but the peace that followed was unlike anything that had come before. Species that had once competed for resources now collaborated on projects that none could have accomplished alone. Trade routes that had been disrupted by centuries of conflict reopened, carrying not just goods but ideas and innovations, between civilizations that had learned to see diversity as strength rather than weakness. Captain Vasquez stood on the observation deck of New Geneva Station, now expanded into a massive complex that served as the capital of the Galactic Defense Alliance. Below her, she could see ships from dozens of species docked side by side, their crews working together on projects that would have been unimaginable just 3 years ago. "Remarkable, isn't it?" said a familiar voice behind her. She turned to see Ambassador Zixtala approaching, the elder diplomat looking younger than she had in years. The stress lines that had marked her face during the crisis were gone, replaced by an expression of contentment that spoke of a life's work finally bearing fruit. "Hard to believe it's only been 3 years since first contact," Vasquez replied. "Sometimes it feels like a different galaxy entirely." "In many ways it is," Zixtala agreed. "When we first asked for help against the Harvesters, we thought we were calling for monsters to fight our war. We never imagined we were calling for teachers who would show us a better way to live." Through the observation port, they could see a sight that had become common throughout the galaxy, a mixed crew of humans and aliens working together on a project that required both human creativity and alien precision. The barriers between species hadn't disappeared entirely, but they had become bridges rather than walls. "What's next?" Vasquez asked. Zixtala smiled, an expression that would have been impossible during the dark days of the Harvester crisis. "Exploration, discovery. There are galaxies beyond our own that we've never visited, civilizations we've never met, wonders we've never imagined. And now, for the first time in galactic history, we have the unity and strength to face whatever we find out there." As if summoned by their conversation, Admiral Martinez appeared on the observation deck, carrying a data pad that contained reports from the furthest reaches of known space. "Ladies," he said with the professional courtesy that had made him one of the most respected military commanders in galactic history, "we've received some interesting signals from the Andromeda Galaxy. It appears we may not be the only civilizations dealing with existential threats." Vasquez and Zixtala exchanged glances that held entire conversations. Another crisis, another call for help, another chance to prove that unity was stronger than individual strength. "How soon can we deploy a response fleet?" Vasquez asked. "The Galactic Defense Alliance Council will meet tomorrow to discuss the matter," Martinez replied. "But preliminary reports suggest we should be ready for anything." As the 3 representatives of different species prepared to face whatever challenges the universe might present, they carried with them the knowledge that had been earned through 3 years of impossible victories. The galaxy had called for monsters to fight their wars, and humanity had answered. But in doing so, they had helped create something far more powerful than any single species could achieve. A truly united galactic civilization that saw diversity not as weakness to be eliminated, but as strength to be celebrated. The Marines had come when aliens pleaded for help. They had stormed through the smoke of impossible battles and emerged victorious against enemies that should have been unbeatable. But their greatest victory wasn't any battle they had won. Their greatest victory was the peace they had helped create, a peace built not on the dominance of one species over others, but on the recognition that every voice in the galactic choir made the song more beautiful. The real war had never been against the Harvesters or the Synthesis. It had been against the fear and suspicion that kept civilizations apart. And in that war, the humans and their allies had achieved something truly unprecedented in galactic history. They had won by refusing to fight alone.